For 4 years my daughter-in-law kept me from seeing my grandchildren. You're a bad influence. We want distance. Until my name appeared on TV. Lottery winner. $64 million. That same day she showed up at my door with the children and a bouquet of flowers. Subscribe to the channel for more stories like this, and comment the city you're watching from. My name is Judith and I'm 63 years old. 4 years ago, my daughter-in-law Hazel took my grandchildren away from me with words that still echo in my mind every single day. You're a bad influence, Judith. We want distance. I was standing in their kitchen that Tuesday morning, holding a bag of homemade cookies I baked for my granddaughter Emma's 7th birthday. The smell of vanilla and chocolate chips filled the air, but Hazel's expression was colder than winter frost. What do you mean, bad influence? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. I set the cookies on the counter with trembling hands. Hazel crossed her arms, her perfectly manicured nails drumming against her designer blouse. You live in that tiny apartment, you work at a laundromat, you buy lottery tickets every week like some gambling addict. Is that the example we want for our children? My heart felt like it was being squeezed in a vice. Hazel, I've been part of their lives since they were born. I helped raise them when you went back to work. That was different. She cut me off. We needed help then. Now we don't. The children are asking questions about why Grandma Judith lives so differently from everyone else they know. It's confusing for them. I looked toward the living room where 8-year-old Tommy was building with blocks and Emma was coloring at the coffee table. They hadn't even looked up when I arrived. When had they stopped running to hug me? They're my grandchildren, I said, my voice cracking. I love them. Love isn't enough, Judith. They need stability. They need to understand success and achievement. Your lifestyle sends the wrong message. Each word felt like a slap. I thought about all the Saturday mornings I'd spent teaching Emma how to braid friendship bracelets. The hours I'd spent reading bedtime stories to Tommy, doing funny voices for all the characters. The way they used to climb into my lap and tell me about their day. Can I at least say goodbye to them? I asked. Hazel glanced at her watch, a platinum piece that probably cost more than I made in 3 months. I think it's better if we make this a clean break. Children are resilient. They'll adjust. Please, Hazel. Don't do this. But she was already walking toward the front door, opening it wide. The message was clear. I picked up my purse with shaking hands and walked past her. As I reached the threshold, I turned back one last time. When they ask where I am, what will you tell them? I'll tell them you had to go away, she said without emotion. It's better this way. The door closed behind me with a soft click that sounded like thunder in my ears. I sat in my old Honda in their driveway for 20 minutes, crying until my chest hurt. Through the window, I could see Tommy and Emma still playing, completely unaware that their grandmother had just been erased from their lives. That night, I called my son David. He'd always been closer to Hazel than to me, especially after his father left when David was 12. I raised him alone, working double shifts to keep us afloat, but somehow Hazel had convinced him that my struggles were character flaws rather than sacrifices. Mom, Hazel told me you two had a conversation, he said when he answered. His tone was careful, diplomatic. David, she won't let me see the children anymore. She says I'm a bad influence. There was a long pause. Mom, you have to understand her perspective. She wants what's best for Tommy and Emma. And you think I'm not what's best for them? Another pause, longer this time. I think maybe some space might be good for everyone. Let things cool down. Some space turned into 4 years. For birthdays missed. For Christmases spent alone. For years of walking past toy stores and fighting the urge to buy presents for children I wasn't allowed to see. I tried calling on their birthdays, but Hazel would answer and politely but firmly tell me it wasn't a good time. I sent cards, but I never knew if they received them. I drove past their house sometimes, hoping to catch a glimpse of them playing in the yard. But I always felt like a stalker and drove away. The worst part wasn't just missing them. It was wondering if they missed me too, or if Hazel had been right about children being resilient. Maybe they had adjusted. Maybe they never asked about Grandma Judith anymore. My small apartment felt emptier each day. The refrigerator that used to be covered with their artwork was now bare except for a grocery list, and a calendar marking days that meant nothing to anyone but me. The toy box I'd kept in the corner gathered dust until I finally donated everything to charity. I couldn't bear to look at it anymore. Work became my escape. At the laundromat, folding other people's clothes and listening to the rhythmic tumbling of washers and dryers, I could almost forget the silence that waited for me at home. My coworkers, mostly women my age or older, became a substitute family of sorts. They knew not to ask about grandchildren when everyone else was sharing photos and stories. Every Tuesday, I bought my lottery tickets at the corner store. It wasn't an addiction like Hazel claimed. It was hope. $2 for the possibility that someday something might change. That someday I might have enough money to prove I wasn't the failure she painted me to be. But deep down I knew money wouldn't fix what was broken. My grandchildren were growing up without me, and I was growing old without them. Some damages cut so deep that time doesn't heal them. It just teaches you to carry the pain more quietly. I never imagined that a slip of paper with 6 numbers would change everything. I never imagined that the very thing Hazel had mocked me for would become the key to a door I thought was locked forever. The routine became my salvation and my prison all at once. Every morning at 6:30, I'd wake up in my studio apartment to the sound of traffic already building outside my window. No small voices asking for breakfast, no cartoons playing on the television, no backpacks to pack or shoes to find. Just silence and the distant hum of a city that didn't know or care about my loss. I'd make coffee for one, toast for one, and sit at my small kitchen table with a book I never really read. The chair across from me stayed empty, though sometimes I'd catch myself setting out 2 cups before remembering there was no one to share morning coffee with anymore. The laundromat where I worked was only 6 blocks away. I could have taken the bus, but I preferred walking. Those 20 minutes each way were when I allowed myself to remember. To think about the mornings when Emma would insist on helping me make pancakes, creating more mess than food. Or the way Tommy would ask me endless questions about everything he saw on our walks to the park. "Grandma Judy, why are flowers different colors?" he'd asked once, his small hand warm in mine as we passed Mrs. Henderson's garden. "Because the world would be boring if everything looked the same," I told him. "Different is beautiful." Now, walking past that same garden 4 years later, I wondered if he remembered that conversation. If he remembered me at all. My job at Sunnyside Laundromat wasn't glamorous, but it paid the bills and gave me purpose. I worked the morning shift from 8 to 4, helping customers with their washing, keeping the machines clean and making change. The owner, Mrs. Park, was a kind woman who never pried into my personal life beyond the occasional, "How are you holding up, Judith?" The customers were mostly working mothers, elderly folks from the nearby apartments, and college students who couldn't afford their own machines. I watched the mothers wrestling with diaper bags and toddlers having meltdowns, and my heart would clench with phantom pain for moments I'd never have again. One regular customer, Maria, brought her twin 5-year-olds every Saturday morning. They'd always wave at me from behind the glass door of the washing machine, making silly faces until I laughed despite myself. One day, the little girl asked Maria, "Why doesn't the nice lady have kids here like everyone else?" Maria had looked embarrassed and whispered something about minding our own business, but the question followed me home. Why didn't I have kids there? Because my own family had decided I wasn't worthy of being part of their lives. My lunch breaks were spent at the small diner next door, where I'd order the same thing every day: a turkey sandwich and black coffee. The waitress, Betty, was probably in her 70s and had worked there for decades. She had a grandson who lived in California and only called on holidays. "Kids today," she'd say, shaking her head as she refilled my coffee, "they think the world started when they were born. Don't know what it means to sacrifice." I'd nod and agree, but inside I wondered if maybe Hazel was right. Maybe I hadn't sacrificed enough. Maybe working 2 jobs to keep David in good schools had been selfish instead of loving. Maybe the missed school plays and parent conferences had damaged him more than I'd realized. After work, I'd stop at Murphy's corner store. Mr. Murphy, a Irishman in his 80s, had owned the place for 40 years. He knew everyone in the neighborhood, their stories, their struggles. He also knew I bought 5 lottery tickets every Tuesday. "Your lucky numbers today, Judith?" he'd ask with a smile that crinkled the corners of his eyes. "The same ones," I'd reply. "Emma's birthday, Tommy's birthday, the day David graduated high school, the day my mother died, and one random number I picked because it felt right that first day 4 years ago when everything fell apart." He never asked why I played the same numbers. Maybe he understood that some people need constants in their lives, especially when everything else has been stripped away. Evenings were the hardest part. That's when families gathered around dinner tables, when homework was being done and bedtime stories were being read, when grandparents were supposed to be getting phone calls about lost teeth and good grades in little league games. I'd heat up a frozen dinner and eat it while watching the news, trying to fill the silence with something other than my own thoughts. Then I'd clean my tiny apartment until it sparkled, because having nothing to do was worse than having too much to do. Sometimes I'd take out the photo album I'd hidden in my bedroom closet. Pictures of Tommy and Emma from birth until age 4 and 3, when the photographs suddenly stopped. Emma's first steps, taken right here in this apartment. Tommy's second birthday party, where he'd insisted on wearing his Batman costume and cape. Both of them asleep on my couch after a day at the zoo. Chocolate ice cream still smudged on their cheeks. I'd trace their faces with my finger and wonder how much they'd changed. Emma would be 11 now, probably interested in music and clothes and boys. Tommy would be 9, maybe playing sports or building more elaborate structures with his beloved blocks. Did they still have the stuffed animals I'd given them? Did Emma still braid friendship bracelets? Or had she moved on to more sophisticated crafts? Did Tommy still ask endless questions about everything he saw? Did they ever think about me? The hardest days were holidays and birthdays. Christmas was unbearable. I'd see families shopping together, children pressed against toy store windows, grandparents loading shopping carts with presents. I'd buy small gifts anyway and donate them to charity, telling myself it was better than nothing. Their birthdays were marked on my calendar with small hearts drawn in red ink. I'd wake up those mornings with a special kind of sadness, knowing that somewhere across town, my grandchildren were celebrating another year of life without me there to witness it. One year I drove to their school on Emma's birthday just to see her. I parked across the street and watched as children poured out the doors, laughing and running toward waiting cars. I spotted her immediately, even though she was taller and her hair was longer. She was talking animatedly with a friend, her face bright with joy. For a moment, I considered getting out of the car, walking over, saying hello. But then I saw Hazel's Mercedes pull up, and I remembered my place in their world. I didn't belong there anymore. I drove home and cried for 2 hours. The lottery tickets were my only rebellion against the life I'd been forced to accept. $2 every Tuesday for the possibility that something might change. Hazel had called it gambling, but it wasn't about the money really. It was about hope. About the idea that maybe the universe wasn't finished with me yet. In my quiet moments, I'd imagine what I'd do if I won. Not the grand gestures or expensive gifts, but the simple things. Taking them to Disney World. Teaching Emma to drive when she turned 16. Watching Tommy graduate from high school. Being the grandmother I'd always wanted to be, if only I got the chance. But those were just dreams. Nice dreams, but dreams nonetheless. I never imagined that one Tuesday, walking into Murphy's store with my $5 and my same 5 numbers, I was about to purchase a ticket that would change everything. I never imagined that my hope, thin as it had become, was about to be tested in ways I never expected. The call came on a Wednesday morning at 7:45, just as I was getting ready for work. I almost didn't answer because I didn't recognize the number, and after 4 years of blocked calls and rejected attempts to reach my grandchildren, unknown numbers usually meant disappointment. "Is this Judith Eleanor Morrison?" The woman's voice was professional but excited. "Yes, this is Judith. Ms. Morrison, this is Sandra Williams from the State Lottery Commission. I have some very exciting news for you." My first thought was that it was a scam. I'd heard about people calling seniors and pretending they'd won money. I almost hung up. "I'm sorry, but I think you have the wrong number," I said, already moving toward the disconnect button. "Wait, please don't hang up. You purchased a lottery ticket at Murphy's Corner Store on Tuesday, March 15th. The numbers were 4, 11, 19, 27, 33, and the Powerball was 8. Is that correct?" My hand froze. Those were my numbers. Emma's birthday, Tommy's birthday, David's graduation, my mother's death date, a random number, and the Powerball I'd chosen that first terrible day 4 years ago. "Yes," I whispered. "Ms. Morrison, you are the sole winner of $64 million. The phone slipped from my hand and clattered onto the kitchen floor. I stared at it for what felt like hours but was probably only seconds. $64 million. The woman's voice was still talking, but it sounded like she was speaking underwater. I picked up the phone with trembling fingers. "I'm sorry, can you repeat that?" "You've won $64 million, Ms. Morrison. Congratulations. Now we'll need you to come to our offices to begin the claiming process. There are some forms to fill out and we'll need to verify your identity. Can you come in today?" I looked around my tiny apartment. At the microwave clock that read 7:52. At my laundromat uniform hanging on the bathroom door. At the life I'd built from the scraps Hazel had left me. "Today," I repeated. "The sooner the better. We like to get winners through the process quickly. There's quite a bit of paperwork involved." I called in sick to work for the first time in 4 years. Mrs. Park was concerned and offered to bring me soup, but I told her I just needed rest. I couldn't tell her the truth. I couldn't tell anyone the truth. Not yet. The lottery office was in downtown, in a building I'd driven past hundreds of times without ever imagining I'd be going inside. The lobby was marble and glass, intimidating in its elegance. I felt underdressed in my best dress, a navy blue one I'd bought for David's wedding 8 years ago. Sandra Williams was a cheerful woman in her 40s who treated me like I was a celebrity. She led me to a conference room where other officials waited with stacks of papers and warm smiles. "The first decision you need to make," Sandra explained, "is whether you want the lump sum or annual payments over 30 years. The lump sum after taxes would be approximately $38 million. $38 million. The number was so large it didn't feel real. I thought about my monthly budget, how I clipped coupons and bought generic brands and calculated every purchase. I thought about the $23.16 I had in my checking account. "The lump sum," I said without hesitation. The paperwork took 3 hours. Forms to sign, accounts to set up, tax implications to discuss. They assigned me a financial advisor and offered to connect me with lawyers and accountants. Everyone was extremely helpful and professional, but I could see the questions in their eyes. A 63-year-old woman who worked at a laundromat and lived in a studio apartment wasn't their typical winner. "One important thing to remember," Sandra said as we wrapped up, "is that lottery winners' names become public information. We'll be issuing a press release later today, and local news stations will likely want to interview you." My stomach clenched. Public information? It's state law. Transparency in government operations. But don't worry, you don't have to do interviews if you don't want to. Just be prepared for some attention over the next few days. I drove home in a daze. $64 million. I kept saying it out loud, trying to make it feel real. I was a millionaire. I was rich. I was everything Hazel had claimed I wasn't. But the strangest thing was that I didn't feel different. I still missed my grandchildren. I still felt the hollow ache of 4 years of silence. Money couldn't fill that void. Couldn't give me back the hugs and bedtime stories and ordinary moments that had been stolen from me. I sat in my apartment that afternoon, staring at the bank paperwork spread across my kitchen table. Tomorrow, $38 million would be deposited into my account. Tomorrow I could buy anything I wanted, go anywhere I pleased, live however I chose. But what I wanted most was something money couldn't buy, my family back. The news broke at 6 o'clock that evening. I watched myself on television, a photograph from my driver's license next to the headline. Local laundromat worker wins $64 million jackpot. The reporter mentioned my name, my age, my neighborhood. They interviewed Mr. Murphy, who beamed with pride as if he'd won the money himself. "Judith's been buying the same numbers for years," he told the camera. "She deserves this more than anyone. She's good people." My phone started ringing at 6:15. Numbers I didn't recognize, probably reporters wanting interviews. I let them all go to voicemail. I wasn't ready to talk about this. I wasn't ready for the attention. But I knew someone was watching. Somewhere across town, in a house I was no longer welcome in, Hazel was seeing my face on the television screen. She was learning that the woman she'd dismissed as a bad influence, the grandmother she deemed unworthy of her children, was now worth more money than most people could imagine. I wondered what she was thinking. I wondered what she would do. I didn't have to wait long to find out. That evening, as I sat with a cup of tea trying to process the surreal turn my life had taken, I heard voices outside my apartment building. Children's voices. High and excited, the way kids sound when they're told they're going somewhere special. My heart started pounding before my brain had fully processed what I was hearing. I moved to my window and looked down at the street 3 floors below. There, standing on the sidewalk, was my son David. Next to him was Hazel, dressed in her expensive clothes and holding a bouquet of flowers. And between them, looking confused but obedient, were Tommy and Emma. Emma was taller now, her hair longer and pulled back in a ponytail. She was wearing a pink dress I'd never seen and shoes that probably cost more than my monthly grocery budget. Tommy had grown too, his face less round than I remembered, more boy than toddler. He was holding a card in his small hands. They were here. After 4 years of silence, they were here. I watched as Hazel pointed up toward my building, saying something to the children that made them nod. David looked uncomfortable, shifting his weight from foot to foot in a way I recognized from his childhood when he knew he was doing something wrong. My hands were shaking as I moved away from the window. They were coming up. They were coming to see me. After all this time, after all the rejection and silence and tears, they were finally coming. But I knew it wasn't because they'd missed me. I knew it wasn't because Hazel had suddenly realized she was wrong. They were here because of the money. Because $64 million had transformed me from a bad influence into someone worth knowing again. The knock on my door came 5 minutes later. Soft but persistent. The kind of knock that said, "We know you're home, we saw the lights on, we're not going away." I stood in my small entryway, my hand on the doorknob, and realized that everything was about to change again. 4 years ago, Hazel had closed a door on me and my relationship with my grandchildren. Now she was on the other side of my door, probably with an explanation or an apology or a carefully rehearsed speech about family and forgiveness. But I wasn't the same woman who had cried in her driveway 4 years ago. I wasn't the same grandmother who had begged for scraps of affection and access to children I loved. Money might not buy happiness, but it had given me something even more valuable: the power to choose what happened next. The knock came again, more insistent this time. I could hear Hazel's voice through the thin door, artificially bright and cheerful. "Judith? It's us. We wanted to see you." As if they'd been a collective us for the past 4 years instead of a family that had deliberately excluded me from their lives. I smoothed my hair, took a deep breath, and opened the door. "Grandmother Judith," Emma exclaimed, but something in her voice sounded rehearsed, like she'd been coached on what to say. She was holding a handmade card with "Congratulations" spelled out in careful 11-year-old handwriting. Tommy hung back behind David's legs, suddenly shy. He was so much bigger than I remembered, no longer the chattering toddler who used to climb into my lap. He looked at me with curious eyes, as if trying to place where he'd seen me before. "Hello, Mom," David said, his voice carrying a mixture of guilt and forced cheer. "We saw the news. We wanted to congratulate you." Hazel stepped forward, that practiced smile stretching across her perfectly made-up face. She was wearing a cream-colored designer suit that probably cost more than my monthly rent, and her hair was styled in a way that looked effortless but had probably taken an hour to achieve. "Judith, congratulations," she said, extending the bouquet of flowers. "We're so happy for you. Aren't we, children?" Both kids nodded obediently. Emma stepped forward and handed me her card. "I made this for you, Grandma Judith." Grandma Judith. She used to call me Grandma Judy. The formal name felt like another small knife wound, a reminder of how much distance had grown between us. "Thank you, sweetheart," I said, taking the card. Our fingers brushed for just a moment, and I felt tears threaten to spill. She was so big now, so grown up. "Would you like to come in?" I stepped aside, and they filed into my small apartment. I watched Hazel's eyes sweep the space, taking in the modest furniture, the tiny kitchen, the single window that faced the alley. 4 years ago, this apartment had been evidence of my failure. Today it was the home of a millionaire, and I could see her struggling to reconcile those two facts. "This is cozy," Hazel said with that same false brightness. "Very efficient." Emma and Tommy stood uncertainly in the middle of the room, clearly unsure what to do with themselves. They'd been to this apartment many times before the banishment, but now it felt foreign to them. I felt foreign to them. "Please sit down," I said, gesturing to the couch. "Can I get anyone something to drink?" "That would be lovely," Hazel said, settling onto the couch and patting the cushions beside her for the children. "Emma, Tommy, sit down." As I moved to the kitchen area, I could hear Hazel speaking in low, urgent tones to David. Words like opportunity and family. And let's not make this awkward, floated over to me. I filled glasses with water, my hands steady despite the storm of emotions churning inside me. When I returned with the drinks, Hazel had composed herself into the picture of a loving daughter-in-law. Judith, I have to say we've all missed you terribly, she began, accepting her glass with a gracious smile. Haven't we, David? David shifted uncomfortably. Mom, we should have called more. The children have been asking about you constantly, Hazel continued, placing a manicured hand on Emma's shoulder. Haven't you, Emma? Emma nodded, but her eyes darted to her mother's face first, checking for approval. Yes, we've missed you a lot, Grandma Judith. The lies were so blatant, so insulting that I almost laughed. 4 years of absolute silence. And now they expected me to believe that my grandchildren had been pining for me? That's strange, I said mildly, sitting in the chair across from them, because when I called on their birthdays, I was told they were too busy to talk to me. Hazel's smile flickered for just a moment. Oh, you know how hectic life gets with children. School activities, playdates. We always meant to call you back. For 4 years. The question hung in the air like smoke. David cleared his throat and looked at his shoes. Emma and Tommy watched the adults with the keen awareness that children develop when they sense tension they don't understand. Well, Hazel said with a laugh that sounded like breaking glass, we're here now. That's what matters, right? Family is what's important. Family. The word that had been absent from their vocabulary when it came to me for 4 years. Now suddenly it was what mattered most. Tell me about school, I said, turning to Emma. What grade are you in now? 6th grade, she answered, relaxing slightly. I like art class the best. We're learning about watercolors. I used to paint with watercolors, I said. Remember? We painted pictures of flowers and trees. Emma's brow furrowed slightly, as if trying to access a memory that had been deliberately buried. I think so. Maybe. And Tommy, what about you? Do you still like building things? Tommy nodded enthusiastically, speaking for the first time since entering the apartment. I have Legos now. Big sets. I built a castle and a spaceship. That's wonderful, I said and meant it. Despite everything, seeing them again, hearing their voices was like finding water in a desert. I'd love to see pictures sometime. Actually, Hazel interjected smoothly, we brought some photos to show you. She reached into her expensive handbag and pulled out her phone, swiping through pictures with practiced efficiency. There were Emma at a piano recital, Tommy at a baseball game, both children at Christmas morning surrounded by mountains of expensive presents. All the moments I'd missed. All the memories I'd been excluded from. They're both doing so well, Hazel said with obvious pride. Emma's in advanced classes, and Tommy made the honor roll last semester. Of course, we've been able to provide them with the best opportunities. Private schools, tutoring, music lessons. The implication was clear. They'd been better off without me. My absence had allowed them to flourish in ways they couldn't have with their poor grandmother in their lives. You must be very proud, I said. We are. But you know, Judith, family is about more than just achievements. Hazel leaned forward, her expression becoming earnest. It's about being together, supporting each other. We've all learned that these past few years. Have you? Oh yes. Which is why we wanted to come here today, to tell you how sorry we are that we lost touch. Life just gets so busy, you know? But we want to fix that. We want to be a family again. I looked at her perfectly composed face, at David's guilty expression, at my grandchildren who had been taught to think of me as someone from their distant past rather than the grandmother who had loved them from the moment they were born. What exactly does that mean? I asked. Being a family again? Hazel's eyes lit up, as if she'd been waiting for this question. Well, we were thinking that maybe you'd like to move closer to us. With your new situation, you could afford a nice place in our neighborhood. The children could visit more often, maybe even stay over on weekends. You want me to move closer to you. Wouldn't that be wonderful? Emma and Tommy could really get to know their grandmother again. We could have family dinners, celebrate holidays together. It would be like starting fresh. Starting fresh. As if the past 4 years of pain and rejection could be erased with proximity and good intentions. And where would I live in your neighborhood? I asked. There's a lovely condo complex just a few minutes from our house. Very upscale, secure. Perfect for someone in your position now. Someone in my position. Not someone they loved or missed, but someone who now had money. Someone whose bank account had made them worthy of inclusion in the family again. I set down my water glass and looked at each face in front of me. Emma and Tommy, innocent in all this, caught between adult games they didn't understand. David, my son, who had chosen his wife's version of reality over his own mother. And Hazel, sitting in my living room after 4 years of silence, spinning fantasies about family unity as if the money in my bank account had somehow erased her cruelty. That's a generous offer, I said finally. Hazel beamed. I knew you'd see it that way. We could start looking at places this weekend if you'd like. I have a wonderful real estate agent. Of course she did. She'd probably already called him. Actually, I said, standing up slowly, I think I need some time to process all this. It's been a very overwhelming day. The smile on Hazel's face tightened almost imperceptibly. Of course. We don't want to rush you. But Judith, I hope you know how much this means to all of us. Having you back in our lives. Back in their lives. As if I'd been the one who left. David stood up, ushering the children toward the door. We should let you rest, Mom. But we'll call you soon, okay? Maybe we can all have dinner this weekend. I nodded and walked them to the door. Emma hugged me goodbye, a quick, polite embrace that felt nothing like the desperate hugs she used to give me when she was small. Tommy waved shyly from behind David. Thank you for the flowers, I said to Hazel as she paused in the doorway. Thank you for seeing us, she replied. I know this is all new and exciting for you, but I want you to know that we're here for you. Whatever you need. Whatever I needed. After 4 years of needing nothing more than a phone call, a visit, a single acknowledgement that I existed, now they were here for whatever I needed. The door closed behind them, and I was alone again with the silence I'd grown accustomed to. But this time the silence felt different. It felt like the pause before a storm, pregnant with possibility and danger in equal measure. I looked at the bouquet of flowers Hazel had brought, expensive blooms arranged with professional precision, beautiful and fragrant but ultimately meaningless. A gesture calculated to impress rather than one born of genuine feeling. Tomorrow they would expect an answer about the condo, about the fresh start, about welcoming them back into my life as if nothing had ever happened. They would expect gratitude for their willingness to include me in their family again, now that I had something to offer them besides love. But they had made one crucial miscalculation. They assumed that money had made me desperate for their approval. They thought that wealth would make me forget the past 4 years of abandonment and pain. They thought I was still the same woman who had begged for scraps of their affection. They were about to learn how wrong they were. 3 days passed before Hazel called. 3 days during which I sat in my small apartment, surrounded by the financial paperwork that confirmed my new reality, and thought about everything that had happened. 3 days to decide exactly how I wanted to handle what came next. When my phone rang at precisely 10 o'clock on Saturday morning, I wasn't surprised to see Hazel's number on the screen. She was nothing if not persistent when she wanted something. Judith, good morning. Her voice was bright and cheerful, as if we'd been chatting regularly for years instead of breaking 4 years of silence just days ago. I hope I'm not calling too early. Not at all, I said, settling into my kitchen chair with my coffee. What can I do for you, Hazel? Well, I was thinking about our conversation the other day, and I got so excited about the possibility of you moving closer to us. I took the liberty of calling my real estate agent, and she has some wonderful properties to show you. Are you free this afternoon? The presumption took my breath away. She hadn't asked if I'd made a decision. She'd simply assumed that I would fall in line with her plans, grateful to be included in their lives again. That was thoughtful of you, I said carefully. But I haven't decided anything yet. There was a brief pause. Oh, well, of course you need time to think. It's a big decision. But Judith, I hope you understand what an opportunity this is. For all of us. The children are so excited about spending more time with their grandmother. The children who had been coached to hug me and call me by my formal name. The children who had looked at me like a stranger in my own apartment. Are they? I asked, because they seemed quite surprised to see me the other day. Another pause, longer this time. Well, they're older now. Children change so much at these ages. But I know they're looking forward to getting reacquainted with you. Reacquainted. as if I were a distant cousin they'd met once at a family reunion, not the grandmother who had helped raise them for the first years of their lives. "Hazel," I said, setting down my coffee cup, "can I ask you something?" "Of course." "Why now?" "I'm sorry." "Why now?" "For years ago you told me I was a bad influence. You said my lifestyle sent the wrong message to the children. You said they needed distance from me. What's changed?" The silence stretched so long I wondered if the call had dropped. Finally, Hazel spoke, her voice carefully modulated. "I think we all say things we don't mean when emotions are running high. I was stressed, overwhelmed with work and the children's activities. I may have been too harsh." "Too harsh," I repeated. "Yes. And I've regretted it ever since. David and I both have. We've missed having you in our lives." The lies came so easily to her, delivered with such conviction that I almost admired her skill. Almost. "I see," I said. "So this has nothing to do with the lottery?" "The lottery?" She sounded genuinely surprised, as if the thought had never occurred to her. "Judith, I hope you don't think we're only here because of the money. That would be terrible. We're here because you're family." Family. There was that word again, deployed like a weapon whenever she needed it. "Well," I said, "I appreciate that. But I think I need more time to consider everything." Of course. Take all the time you need. But maybe while you're thinking, you could join us for dinner tomorrow? Nothing fancy, just family. The children would love it." The invitation was delivered with such casual confidence that I realized she still believed she was in control of this situation. She still thought she could manipulate me with promises of access to my grandchildren. Still thought I was the desperate woman who had cried in her driveway 4 years ago. "Actually," I said, "I think it would be better if you came here. Tomorrow evening, 7 o'clock. Just you and David. Without the children." "Without the children?" Her voice sharpened slightly. "But they're so excited to see you again. I'd like to have an adult conversation first. About what happened 4 years ago. About what you really want from me now. Judith, I don't think we need to rehash the past. What matters is moving forward." "I disagree. I think the past matters very much. 7 o'clock tomorrow, Hazel. Just you and David." I hung up before she could argue further. The next evening they arrived precisely on time. Hazel wore a different expensive outfit, this one in soft pastels that probably cost more than I used to make in 2 months. David looked uncomfortable in his pressed khakis and button-down shirt, like he was dressed for a job interview rather than dinner with his mother. "Thank you for having us," Hazel said as they entered, carrying a bottle of wine that probably cost more than my weekly grocery budget. "This is lovely." I'd set my small table with the good dishes I rarely used, lit a candle, made a simple pasta dinner. Not because I wanted to impress them, but because I wanted them to remember that this was my home, my territory. We made small talk through the first course. David asked about my job at the laundromat, seeming surprised when I told him I'd given notice. "What will you do now?" he asked. "I'm not sure yet. I have options now that I didn't have before." Hazel smiled brightly. "So many possibilities. You could travel, take up hobbies, maybe even do some volunteer work. There are wonderful charities in our area that would love to have someone with your experience." "Your experience?" She made it sound like working at a laundromat was a career choice rather than a necessity. After we finished eating, I cleared the plates and poured coffee. The moment of truth had arrived. "So," I said, sitting back down, "let's talk about why you're really here." David shifted in his chair. "Mom, we told you. We want to reconcile. We want to be a family again. 4 years ago," I said, looking directly at Hazel, "you told me I was a bad influence on your children. You said my lifestyle was confusing them. You said you wanted distance. What's changed?" Hazel's smile never wavered, but something cold flickered in her eyes. "People grow, Judith. Perspectives change. I realized I made a mistake." "What kind of mistake?" "I was too protective, too worried about the children's environment. I didn't consider how much they needed their grandmother in their lives." "So you're saying that for 4 years, you kept them away from someone they needed? And you're just realizing that was wrong?" "I'm saying I acted hastily. In the heat of the moment." I leaned back in my chair and studied her face. She was good at this, maintaining her composure even under direct questioning. But I could see the calculation behind her eyes, the way she was measuring each word before she spoke. What heat of the moment! As I recall, you called me over specifically to tell me I wasn't welcome anymore. That seemed pretty calculated to me. David finally spoke up. Mom, can't we just move forward? Dwelling on the past isn't helping anyone. I'm not dwelling, David. I'm trying to understand. Because the timing of this reconciliation is interesting. What do you mean? Hazel asked, but her voice was a shade too innocent. I mean that in 4 years you never once reached out to me. Not on Christmas, not on my birthday, not when I sent cards for the children's birthdays. Nothing. But 3 days after my name appears on television as a lottery winner, suddenly you miss me terribly and want to be a family again. The silence that followed was deafening. David stared at his coffee cup like it held the secrets of the universe. Hazel's smile finally slipped, just for a moment before she rebuilt it. I can see how that might look, she said carefully. But correlation isn't causation, Judith. Yes, the timing is coincidental, but... Coincidental, I interrupted. That's an interesting word choice. What would you prefer me to say? I'd prefer you to tell me the truth. The truth is that we've missed you. The truth is that we want you back in our lives. The truth is that family is more important than money. Family is more important than money, I repeated slowly. That's beautiful, Hazel. Really. So when you told me 4 years ago that I was a bad influence because I worked at a laundromat and lived in a small apartment, you weren't making a judgment about my financial situation. Her jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. That wasn't about money. That was about stability. Stability. Which you measured how? By your ability to provide a consistent, positive environment for children. And now that I have $64 million, suddenly I can provide that? Now that you have options, yes. You can choose where to live, how to spend your time. You can be the grandmother you always wanted to be. The grandmother I always wanted to be, I said, tasting the words like poison. Hazel, what kind of grandmother was I before? When I was poor. She hesitated, clearly sensing the trap but unable to avoid it. You were loving, but limited. Limited how? By your circumstances. By your need to work so much, by your living situation, by your financial stress. So you're saying that love isn't enough? That being limited by circumstances makes someone unfit to be around children. I'm saying that children deserve the best possible environment. And you decide what that is? As their mother, yes. The honesty of that statement hung between us like a blade. Finally, the mask had slipped completely. This wasn't about what was best for Emma and Tommy. This was about Hazel's control, her need to curate every aspect of her children's lives according to her standards. I see, I said. So when I was poor, I was unfit. Now that I'm rich, I'm suddenly acceptable. That's not what I said. It's exactly what you said. David finally looked up from his coffee. Mom, please. We're trying to fix this. No, David, I said, my voice quiet but firm. You're trying to manage this. There's a difference. I stood up and walked to the window, looking down at the street where they'd stood 3 days ago with their flowers and their rehearsed apologies. When I turned back, both of them were watching me with expressions I couldn't quite read. Here's what I think happened, I said. 4 years ago, you decided I wasn't good enough for your family. You were embarrassed by my job, my apartment, my lifestyle. You didn't want your children exposed to someone who represented failure in your world. So you cut me out, told yourself it was for their own good, and moved on with your lives. Neither of them contradicted me. Then 3 days ago, you saw my face on television next to a very large number. Suddenly, I wasn't a failure anymore. I was an opportunity. A rich grandmother who could enhance your family's status instead of diminishing it. That's not, Hazel started. Let me finish, I said, and something in my voice made her stop talking. You came here with flowers and fake apologies and coached children, thinking you could manipulate me the same way you did 4 years ago. You thought money would make me desperate for your approval again. I moved back to the table and placed my hands flat on its surface, leaning forward slightly. But here's what you didn't consider. 4 years ago, when you threw me away like garbage, you taught me something valuable. You taught me that I don't need your approval to have worth. You taught me that I can survive without you. The color drained from Hazel's face. So now you want to know what's going to happen next? I asked. They both nodded, though I wasn't sure they really wanted to know. You're going to leave, I said simply. You're going to go home to your perfect house and your perfect life. And you're going to tell Emma and Tommy that Grandma Judith won't be moving closer after all. Judith, David started. I'm not finished, I said, and he fell silent. If you want a relationship with me, if you want your children to know their grandmother, it will be on my terms. Not yours. You don't get to control when I'm worthy of your family, and when I'm not. You don't get to use my grandchildren as leverage to get what you want from me. I straightened up, looking down at both of them. And most importantly, you don't get to rewrite history. I remember every day of the past 4 years. I remember every rejection, every silence, every moment you made me feel like I wasn't good enough. Money doesn't erase that. The room was silent except for the ticking of my kitchen clock. Finally, Hazel found her voice. So what are you saying? That you don't want a relationship with your grandchildren? It was her last weapon, the final manipulation. The suggestion that I was the one hurting the children by refusing to play her game. I'm saying that love isn't conditional, Hazel. But relationships are built on respect. And you've never respected me. I walked to the door and opened it. I think it's time for you to leave. They left without another word. Hazel's face was pale and rigid as she gathered her purse, her perfectly practiced composure finally cracking. David paused at the doorway, opening his mouth as if to say something, but I simply shook my head. Whatever he wanted to say could wait. Maybe forever. I closed the door behind them and leaned against it, listening to their footsteps disappear down the hallway. The silence that followed felt different from the lonely quiet I'd grown accustomed to over the past 4 years. This silence felt clean, final, like the end of a storm. 3 weeks passed before I heard from them again. 3 weeks during which I began the process of truly understanding what $64 million could mean for my life. I hired the financial advisor the Lottery Commission had recommended. A calm woman named Patricia who helped me navigate investments and tax implications without making me feel foolish for my questions. The beauty of this amount of money, Patricia told me during our second meeting, is that you can be generous with yourself without worrying about running out. You can live comfortably, travel, help others, whatever brings you joy. Whatever brings me joy. I'd spent so many years focused on survival, on getting through each day, that I'd almost forgotten what joy felt like. I started small. I bought myself a new car, nothing flashy, just reliable transportation that wouldn't leave me stranded. I moved to a larger apartment in a better neighborhood, with 2 bedrooms and a view of the park instead of the alley. I kept working at the laundromat for another 2 weeks, not because I needed to, but because I wanted to say goodbye properly to Mrs. Park and my coworkers who had become my chosen family. You sure you don't want to buy this place and be the boss? Mrs. Park joked on my last day, but her eyes were sad. Won't be the same without you. I hugged her goodbye and promised to visit. Some relationships were worth maintaining. The call came on a Tuesday evening as I was settling into my new apartment, unpacking boxes and trying to decide where to hang the few photographs that mattered to me. Judith? It's David. His voice sounded strained, tired in a way that had nothing to do with physical exhaustion. Hello, David. Can we talk? I mean, really talk this time. I set down the box I'd been holding and settled into my new armchair, a comfortable blue recliner that felt like a luxury after years of second-hand furniture. I'm listening. I've been thinking about what you said, about respect, about the past 4 years, about everything. He paused, and I heard him take a shaky breath. You were right. About all of it. I waited, letting him find his words. Hazel convinced me that cutting you out was the right thing to do. She said the children needed consistency, needed to be around people who could provide them with opportunities we couldn't give them ourselves if we were supporting you too. Supporting me. As if my love for my grandchildren had been a financial burden rather than a gift. She made it sound like we were protecting them, he continued. From disappointment, from seeing how hard life could be. She said they deserved better. And you believed her. I wanted to believe her. It was easier than standing up to her, easier than fighting about it. And I told myself that maybe she was right, that maybe you would be happier not having to worry about babysitting and birthdays, and all the obligations that come with being part of a family. The honesty in his voice was painful to hear. My son, admitting that he'd chosen the path of least resistance over defending his own mother. David, I said quietly, I never saw loving your children as an obligation. I know that now. I've always known it, if I'm being honest. But Hazel has a way of making you doubt yourself, of making her perspective seem like the only logical one. I thought about that. About how Hazel had presented her cruelty as protection, her exclusion as wisdom. About how she'd convinced my son that abandoning me was an act of kindness. What changed? I asked. The money at first. When we saw you on the news, Hazel immediately started planning how to bring you back into our lives. She had it all figured out within hours. Where you should live, how often you should see the kids, what role you should play in our family. It was like she'd already decided how to spend your money. My heart clenched with a familiar pain. Even David could see what Hazel had really wanted. But then I started thinking about Emma and Tommy. About how they used to light up when you walked into a room. About how they'd run to the window when they heard your car in the driveway. About how they used to beg me to call you when they were upset about something. I closed my eyes, remembering those moments. The unconditional love in their small faces. The way they trusted me completely to make everything better. They ask about you sometimes, David said softly. Hazel shuts down the conversation, but they ask. Emma wanted to know why you stopped coming to see us. Tommy asked if you were sick, if that's why we couldn't visit you. The tears came then, hot and silent. My grandchildren had wondered about me, had missed me, had been told some version of events that kept them from understanding the truth. David, I said when I could speak again, what do you want from me? I want to apologize. Really apologize, not the fake thing we tried to do 3 weeks ago. I want you to know that I'm sorry for choosing her version of reality over my own mother. I'm sorry for letting 4 years go by without fighting for you. And what about Hazel? A long pause. We've been having some difficult conversations. About priorities, about what kind of family we want to be. About whether money really is more important than love. And what did you decide? I decided that I don't want to be married to someone who could throw away a grandmother because she was inconvenient. I decided that I don't want my children growing up thinking that love is conditional on status or wealth. The implications of his words hit me slowly. David, are you saying? I'm saying that I filed for divorce last week. I'm saying that I want Emma and Tommy to know their real grandmother, not the version Hazel tried to create for her own purposes. I sat in stunned silence, processing this turn of events. My son was leaving his wife. My grandchildren's world was about to change dramatically. And somehow it was all connected to my lottery win and the chain of events it had set in motion. I need you to know, David continued, that this isn't about your money. This is about me finally growing a backbone and doing what I should have done 4 years ago. What I should have done the day she told you to leave. Where are the children? I asked. With me. I have temporary custody while we work out the details. They're confused, scared about their parents separating. But they're also excited about something. What? They're excited that they're going to see their Grandma Judy again. Grandma Judy. Not the formal Grandma Judith they'd been coached to use, but the name they called me when they were small and innocent and loved me without reservation. I don't know if I can do this, I whispered. I don't know if I can risk getting my heart broken again. I understand, David said. I understand if you can't forgive me, if you can't trust me again. But Mom, they need you. I need you. We need to figure out how to be a real family, not the artificial thing Hazel created. I looked around my new apartment, at the space I'd created for myself with my lottery winnings. It was beautiful, comfortable, peaceful. I could live here happily for the rest of my life, traveling when I wanted, helping charities that mattered to me, building a quiet existence free from the pain of family drama. But it would also be a life without Emma's laughter, without Tommy's endless questions, without the possibility of being the grandmother I'd always wanted to be. Can I think about it? I asked. Of course. Take all the time you need. But Mom, I love you. I've always loved you. I'm sorry it took me so long to remember that love means protecting the people you care about, not sacrificing them for convenience. After we hung up, I sat in my chair for a long time, watching the sun set over the park outside my window. Part of me wanted to stay safe, to protect myself from the possibility of more rejection and pain. But a larger part of me remembered the way Emma used to fall asleep in my lap during story time, the way Tommy used to hold my hand when we walked to the park. Maybe some risks were worth taking. Maybe some hearts were strong enough to break and heal and love again. I picked up my phone and dialed David's number. "Can I see them this Saturday?" I asked when he answered. "Just for a few hours. Something simple like ice cream and a walk in the park." "Are you sure?" "No," I said honestly. "But I want to try." Saturday afternoon, I waited on a park bench near the playground, my heart hammering against my ribs like a caged bird. At exactly 2 o'clock, I saw them walking toward me. David looked nervous but determined. Emma had grown even taller in the 3 weeks since I'd seen her, her legs long and coltish. Tommy was wearing a baseball cap and carrying a small toy car. When they spotted me, Emma broke into a run. "Grandma Judy!" she called, and the sound of my real name in her voice was like music. She threw herself into my arms with the abandon of a child who remembered what it felt like to be unconditionally loved. Tommy followed more slowly, but when he reached me, he climbed onto the bench beside me and leaned against my arm. "Dad said you're rich now," he said matter-of-factly. "I am," I said. "Does that change anything?" He considered this seriously. "Are you still gonna tell me stories?" "If you want me to." "Then it doesn't change anything important." Out of the mouths of babes. We spent 3 hours together that day. We got ice cream and fed ducks at the pond and played on the playground equipment. Emma told me about her art classes and showed me pictures on David's phone of watercolor paintings she'd created. Tommy demonstrated how fast he could run and asked me to time him with my watch. They didn't ask about the divorce or about where I'd been for 4 years or about why everything was different now. They just soaked up my attention like flowers turning toward the sun. And I realized that children's capacity for forgiveness is perhaps the most beautiful thing in the world. As we walked back to David's car, Emma slipped her hand into mine. "Grandma Judy," she said, "are you going to disappear again?" The question was like a knife to my heart, but I squeezed her hand gently. "Not if I can help it, sweetheart. Never again if I can help it." 6 months later, I was sitting in my living room with Emma curled up next to me on the couch, reading Charlotte's Web aloud while Tommy built an elaborate city with blocks on the floor. David was in the kitchen making dinner, and the sounds of normal family life filled my home. My lottery winnings had bought me many things: security, comfort, the ability to help others, the freedom to choose how I spent my time. But the most valuable thing money had given me was this second chance. Not because wealth made me worthy of love, but because it had revealed who truly loved me and who had only been using me. Hazel tried to contest the divorce, tried to claim that David was having some kind of breakdown influenced by my sudden wealth. But the courts saw through her manipulation just as clearly as I had. She was awarded minimal custody and moved to another state, starting fresh with a new identity as a victim of circumstances rather than the architect of her own downfall. I never gloated about her departure. There was no satisfaction in watching someone destroy themselves with their own greed and cruelty. I simply felt relief that the poison had been removed from our lives. The money was still there, still growing under Patricia's careful management. I'd bought a larger house where Emma and Tommy could have their own rooms when they stayed with me. I'd started a small scholarship fund for children whose grandparents were raising them, understanding now how many families didn't fit the traditional mold. I traveled to places I'd only dreamed of seeing, sometimes alone, sometimes with David and the children. But the real wealth was this: Emma's head on my shoulder as we read together, Tommy's excited chatter about his school day, David's quiet apology every time he caught himself taking our rebuilt relationship for granted. The real wealth was knowing that love, true love, doesn't disappear when times get hard. It waits. It endures. And sometimes, if you're very lucky, it gets a second chance to flourish. As I turned the page of our book and felt Emma settle more comfortably against my side, I smiled. The numbers on my bank statement were impressive, but this moment was priceless. And for the first time in years, I felt truly completely rich.